Good morning. This is Rich Sierra with the Florida Small Business Legal Center. This is episode number 19 of Business SOS. We're excited that we continue providing great content for you and great business advice within the legal context, of course, and talk about my book, Business SOS, 8 Common Legal Mistakes Business Owners Make and How to Avoid Them. Available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and you can also ask for it in your local bookstores. For the last few weeks, I've been doing what I call as a franchise series. Franchising is a very important component of the way we do business, and also it's a way that a lot of business owners use that vehicle to start their own business. So I wanted to basically spend some time talking about that. And 2 episodes ago, I talked about what to look for if you're interested in buying a franchise, and I went into some details, really going outside the FDD. And the questions to ask that you might be interested in, I gave you some very good tips, like asking the franchisees, asking them questions about their performance, how do they like the support they get. In the last episode, I went into the franchise disclosure document. In that one, this could be, part 2 of that particular episode, because the franchise disclosure document, it is a document that is required by the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission, to be provided to prospective franchisees before they purchase a franchise. These are the minimum disclosure requirements a franchisor has to make in order before you decide to purchase a franchise, and they have to give you 14 days to review this document. And as I mentioned before, these are minimum required disclosures, so it's just something they're required to do. So do not expect to have all the information you need about the franchisor or the franchise from this document. But it's important to look at it, because by looking at this document, you'll have the ability to ask more questions. And this is the purpose of why I'm doing this podcast, is you're not going to become an expert on franchising by listening to this podcast. You're not going to have every information you need when evaluating purchasing a franchise, but it'll give you additional tools that will give you the ability to ask more questions as you begin to look at this document. And also, when you look at this document as well, you'll be able to look at it from a different perspective, as opposed to the first time you look at it, if you have no background, no legal background, you have never seen the document before, you're going to be overwhelmed. Sometimes it's like 200 pages long. But now you'll be able to break that down and look at the various sections, and said, you know what, I remember listening to a podcast with Rich Sierra, and he asked me to look for these items, and you'll be able to look at them. So last time we talked about the franchisor background, the business background of the franchise, the litigation history of the franchise, whether or not any of the officers have filed bankruptcy, and also the initial and other fees that you'll be required to pay as a franchisee. So we went over that in the last episode. So today we're going to go into a different aspect of the FDD. And again, on my show notes, I will have a link to where I'm getting this information directly from the FTC. You'll be able to download this actual handout and be able to have reference to it as well. So today we're going to talk about a number of items. The first one I want to talk about is supplier, the territory, and customer restrictions. There are basically 3 items here that I want to talk about. And some franchises, let's talk about supplier first. In some franchises, when you go, say, for example, to McDonald's, you have a uniform, you have basically the same experience, whether you go to a franchise in Boca Raton, a franchise in Miami, anywhere, the objective is to have the same experience. So in many occasions, in most cases, we have, in this case, like a food franchise, they require you to purchase the supplies from specific suppliers, and that is very common. If you have, say, an Italian restaurant franchise or any type of franchise that sells consumer goods or something that you're going to consume, that depends on a specific recipe and specific look and feel, they, for the most part, will require you to purchase the items specifically from their approved suppliers. So what the franchisor does, they already have these national contracts with large providers, whether it's a food supplier, whether it's a paper supplier, whether it's a any type of goods. So you're required to purchase them from these types of suppliers, so you can basically deviate from that. That's the way they ensure the uniformity and the consistency through the customer experience. So one of the things you need to ask is, well, if I'm run out of these items, can I go outside of the franchise? What do I do if I run out? So you want to ask that question, and also you want to ask this. Also, another question is whether or not the franchisor receives a rebate. Excuse me. You want to ask the question whether or not the franchisor receives a rebate from the supplier for, in essence, requiring you as a franchisee from purchasing the supplies directly from them. They have to disclose that. Just ask the question. Nothing wrong with it. Some franchisors do it, receive the rebate. Some of them don't. So just ask the question as well. Something else also you will most likely be required to have is a POS system. It's something that you sell consumer goods to the consumer, whether it's a retail location, whether it's a restaurant. So the POS system is basically the system that you're gonna basically have where you collect the money. So it is the cashier, is the credit card system. So the reason they require you to use their same system for collections, for charging the fees to the consumers, because they will basically have access to that information directly, and that's the way they actually determine your sales, and that's the way they will determine the royalties that you would owe. So it is kind of a turnkey integrated system, but you're going to be required to use their vendors, and I don't think you can deviate for that. There's not a lot of flexibility in negotiation. Remember, you're buying a system that is already established, and it is successful according to the franchisor, and obviously you look at it because you believe that it's successful. So you're going to be able to deviate from that. Territory. And I spent some time talking about territory in a prior episode, and territory is extremely important, and it's one of the most important decisions you're going to make in negotiating your franchise. And I mentioned this before, that in some cases you're required to put a franchise fee before the territory has been established. If you're serious about purchasing this type of franchise, whatever that is, you want to make sure that the territory that you're looking at, that's what you want to purchase. I do not recommend anyone to put a deposit or a franchise fee without locking in the territory, simply because then you don't like the territory is not available. Then you have to basically try to fight to get that deposit back. And it becomes an uphill battle depending on the terms of the contract. So the territory is extremely important. And you have to look, when you look at territory, look at, okay, what is going to be my competition, not only on similar types of businesses, but also from other franchisees as well. I mean, what is the distance between the radius from my franchise versus somebody else's franchise? Is it going to be a carryover? Is it going to be a situation that some of the customers from the other franchisee might be able to get some of my customers? So understanding that is very important, especially now that when you advertise on the web, for instance, you really have no territorial restrictions. You're basically, anybody can access that information, regardless of where the geography is. So find out what the territory consists of. How's that territory determined? What criteria is the franchisor? And they might not share all this information with you, but how's the territory determined in order to ensure success to your franchise? And how are you going to, when you make that decision to say, okay, I want this territory, I want this radius, this number of zip codes, find out, okay, the customers that I'm interested in selling to, do those customers live there? Their businesses are there? So that's a very important criteria and a very important component of the decision making on selecting a franchise. So spend a lot of time in the territory, see what other territories are available, but make that analysis. It's extremely important that you make that analysis in order to be able to make an informed decision on whether or not this is something for you. Remember, the FDD is to give you the minimum disclosure requirements required by the FTC. It is up to you to ask more questions. If you look at the FDD and say, okay, this is fine, I'm going with it, it is on you for not doing the proper due diligence. So they did their job in providing you that information. It is up to you to make the determination on whether or not this is the right business for you. And you can enlist professionals like accountants, attorneys that understand franchising to be able to assist you in making that decision. Another important question to ask is whether you can advertise on the web. Some franchisors put limitations on that. So you can have a listing on our national website, but you can have your own website. So you have to find out what flexibility you have on online advertising. Number two, social media is extremely important. Whether you can have your own Instagram account, your own TikTok account, Facebook account. Those are very, very important, because if you have a business that needs to connect to the community, you don't want to have restrictions on those items. So it's difficult to make connections to the community if you don't have the ability to have your own social media account to promote your business. So find that out. Find out, what can I do, what I can't do. But you got to find that out before, and that's usually disclosed on the franchise disclosure document. And if not, it will be disclosed for sure in your franchise agreement. But it'll be there. And we'll talk about the franchise agreement much later, and I'm actually going to dedicate a specific podcast segment on the franchise agreement. I'll go specific to those items because it's a longer conversation to have, and that's going to be the most important document that you're going to sign when you are purchasing a franchise. Your franchise disclosure document, your franchise agreement, and we will dedicate a show just to that. Let's talk about advertising and training. This is I kind of touched upon advertising just in the last just a few minutes ago. Part of your franchise royalties and part of the fees that you most likely will have to pay as a new franchisee or as a franchisee is that you'll have to contribute to an advertising fund. And that's very common through most franchises that I've seen in terms of the FTDs that I reviewed. And that's the reason for that is that you're going to be contributing to an advertising fund so the franchisor can purchase advertising on behalf of the brand. And the objective is to purchase the advertising and promote the brand, so that way there's familiarity, and collectively all the franchisees pool their money together. The franchisor promotes the brand, and that's going to help you along the way. So that's one component of the advertising. The second one is that very likely you will be required to spend a certain amount of money in advertising. And the reason for that is that, the national advertising or regional advertising is going to cover so much. The local advertising is going to be up to you because you're going to have a protected territory. And by its nature, you have to promote within your territory to get the local customers. So the franchisor, as part of a business practice, will most likely require you're going to spend a minimum amount in advertising to promote your franchise. So find out what is the amount you have to spend, and also you got to put that in your business plan as well. Let's talk about training. Training is a very important component to that. All of them are important, but a lot of franchisees, a lot of my clients kind of gloss over that, and I ask them, what type of training are you going to be receiving? We're going to go like 2 days to a corporate office. We're going to see some online videos. I may have somebody with me, when I open the restaurant, open the business. So the type of training you're going to receive it's just the beginning. You're not going to be proficient at this business just by a 2-day training program. It's not going to happen. Business requires a lot of experience, requires a lot of training, a lot of support, and nothing replaces experience. So, but the training will give you the baseline of what you need to know in terms of following their business model. So usually you have in the franchise disclosure document, you also have an outline of the operations manual. You have two things. You have the training. It tells you specifically, what the training consists of. It tells you whether it's going to be classroom training, how many hours. They'll require the owner of the franchise to attend that training, and in some cases they require whoever's going to be the person running the franchise. If you're going to buy the franchise for somebody else to run it, you need to designate that individual to attend the training, and it's mandatory. In some cases, you got to fly to a corporate office outside of the area, and you basically pay those expenses, but training is included. They may give you an outline of what the training will consist of. We'll give you like an agenda. So ask for that agenda. Listen, what is the training like? And what material will I be able to receive after the training? And that the second component that you will probably receive is going to be an operations manual. And in the operations manual, it'll most likely be lent to you according to the franchisor. It's not something that's going to be your property. It's going to be, you'll have the ability to use this operation manual as long as you're a franchisee. If you leave the franchise or terminate it, you got to return that because it's proprietary. But in the franchise disclosure document, you will have an outline or a table of content of this operations manual. Go over that. Spend some time looking at it because it'll give you kind of a flavor of how detailed or what thought process the franchisor went through in developing this franchise, the franchise model. So spend some time on the training, what it consists of, also on the operations manual, the outline, or the table of content. But also, I like to know, and this is something you can ask whoever is the representative for the franchisor. So, after the training, what support will I receive? Because after the 2 or 3 day training that you receive, or whatever number of days that takes, you're going to go back to running your franchise. Remember, you're opening a brand new business, which in itself comes with some challenges. You're also learning a brand new business model, a system, and you're also developing a learning curve of a brand new business that perhaps you had no experience before. So there are a lot of challenges along the way, plus whatever unexpected things will happen with the business, which inevitably they will happen. So having the ability to receive support, whether it's a hotline or a telephone number or somebody that will be available to you as you open this franchise, that something happens, you want to be able to text someone from the corporate office, send an email, or put in a phone call, say, listen, this happened to me. What do I do? And it's very important. And also whether or not you'll have ongoing training along the way after that initial minimum training. That's as you develop that learning curve. So find that out. And also what I would suggest is to call other franchisees. In the franchise disclosure document, you will have a list of franchisees as well, of current and past franchisees. And you can actually find out whether when they started the franchise, if they're recent franchisees or they're basically or somebody's been there in the system for a while. Put in a phone call and say, how was your training like? How did the training help you? When you finish that training, did you feel that you could actually operate this franchise, or did it give you that baseline, that beginning, to start running that business? So I would ask that question. That will help you give you more confidence in whether or not this particular franchise is right for you. The training and support is very important as you begin your journey as a franchisee. The last topic I want to talk about today is going to be the renewal, the termination, transfer, and the dispute resolution process of the franchise. So one of the things, you got when you look at your business plan and engaging into this new journey or beginning this new journey, you got to determine, okay, how long will I keep this franchise? What is my plan of exit? Am I buying this franchise to run it for 10 years, maybe sell it? Am I buying this franchise to keep it for 5 in a 10-year period and then sell it at the midpoint? What is your exit plan? And as a business owner, you should think of an exit plan, simply because, A, nothing lasts forever. Number 2, you got to have a vision of what is the purpose of why you're going into business in the first place. Whether it's a franchise, whether it's a business you want to open, there has to be a purpose to that. And obviously, it has to be for how long are you planning to do this? And so that goes into this particular section, and it's an important section. All of them are important, but now we're talking about exit. You said, okay, I'm interested in the franchise. I want to go ahead and buy it or become a franchisee. I'm putting my deposit. I like the territory. So the question is, okay, so how long do you want to be a franchisee? What is your objective? So some franchises are 5 years with renewal periods. You renew it for 5 years, or some of them are 10 years renewal. So you have the franchise license for 10 years, and then you renew it another 10-year period. So you have to look at how long the franchise is for. And also, what are the requirements for renewing a franchise? And I'll give you an example. Say you have a restaurant franchise. They have a decor, they have a trade dress, they have a specific requirements for furniture, what you have in the walls, the color scheme, everything. So it is not uncommon when you have a franchise that at the renewal period or even before the renewal period, they said, okay, after this interval, we're going to require you to refurbish all the furniture. We're going to require you to repaint everything. So what is going to be the cost of that renewal? You need to at least have that in mind. How do I terminate the franchise? This is very important because as a franchisee, and I have not seen too many, in fact, the franchise closure documents that I've seen, it's very difficult for a franchisee to voluntarily terminate a franchise. Then we repeat. It is very difficult for a franchisee to voluntarily terminate a franchise. The reason for that is because it is part of the contract. You can terminate the franchise in some cases by mutual consent, and there's a process to terminate the franchise if you want to terminate it. Or you can the franchisor has the right to terminate the franchise if you do not comply with the franchise requirements. If you don't pay the royalties, if you do not keep your, if you don't follow the procedures, there's some reporting requirements in some cases, and there's a cure provision. So the termination provisions are sometimes very complex, but understand that and read that. The objective of this conversation that we're having today is that you need to know what is your requirement to get in the franchise and what are the requirements of how you can get out of the franchise, if at all. Obviously, if you decide that you no longer want to be in business or go bankrupt, there are different ways to get out of it, but understand there should not be any surprises to you as you go into business or you go into a franchise. What happens, the what ifs. So understand the termination provision, and it's very well outlined, and it's usually a long section. You're not going to go with that in the franchise agreement in more detail. You want to sell the franchise. Sometimes, in many occasions, franchises are successful. You want to sell it. You can sell it just like you sell any other business. Just a couple of quirks here. The franchisor has to agree to the new buyer, and that's usually they qualify the buyer just the way they qualified you to become a franchisee. There's a transfer fee that has to be paid. Usually, it can be negotiated. Either you pay it as franchisee, or you can have the buyers pay it. And there's other than that, this usually they have to enter into a franchise agreement or a transfer agreement. So you can sell your business, your franchise, just the way you sell any other business. So it's not too complex of a process. In fact, that's actually a good way to exit the franchise is selling it. You make extra money. You get your investment back, hopefully more. Dispute resolution. What happens to have an issue with the franchisor? What happens if we have a dispute? How are we going to resolve it? In many cases, the franchisor requires arbitration. And arbitration is basically a private judge. Instead of going to court, you go through a private judicial system, for the lack of a better analogy, like the American Arbitration Association. There's another one called JAMS, in which you have a retired judge or an attorney who's a qualified arbitrator that basically will handle the matter as opposed to going to court. So reading that section is very important. And if you didn't understand it, have an attorney explain it to you. But understand if we have an issue, if we have a legal dispute, how is this going to be resolved? There's a mechanism for that. So in terms of recapping what we talked about today, we talked about supplier, territory, and customer restrictions of the franchise disclosure document. We talked about advertising and training. And we also talked about renewal, termination, transfer, and dispute resolution. The next episode, I'll basically finish the series on the franchise disclosure document. And I'm actually going to the franchise agreement because I think it's important to begin to talk about that. And in fact, I'll do that in the next episode. If you have any legal questions you want to reach out to me, just please email me at richsierra.com. Remember, if I select your legal question and we talk about it, I'll send you a copy, autographed copy of a book at no cost, Business SOS. If you're interested in learning more about our legal services, go to our website at floridasmallbusinesslegalcenter.com. We're on Facebook at FSB Legal. If you want to watch the video of this podcast, we're on YouTube at youtube.com/@RichardSierra. We're on Instagram at FSB Legal. If you want to reach us, our number is 866-842-5202. Business SOS, 8 common legal mistakes business owners make and how to avoid them. It's available on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, your local bookstores. Apologize for my voice today. If you like the podcast, follow us, give us a review, share it with your friends. We're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you get your podcast. Until next week, this is Rich Sierra. Remember, my goal is to help you succeed.